It's time for another edition of Live from the Heartland. Michael James here in Chicago. This is Live from the Heartland for the week of February 17th, the year 2024. We're recording it both on Monday the 12th and on Thursday the 15th. And there's a number of things I want to share. A good thing, kind of a mixed bag. The Cook County jail population has plummeted by 58% over the last decade, but the spending at the jail has decreased only 18%. That's from WBEZ. Out there in the country, there's continuing attempts to ban books. And I just noticed that on the question of food insecurity, 15 states have opted not to go along with a new program that would have fed kids during the summer. Hopefully that'll change over time. On a very sad note, Kelvin Kiptum, the runner who broke the world marathon time here in the Chicago Marathon last October, was killed in a car crash. Very sorry to hear that. He was going to be the first guy to break 2 hours. A wonderful human being, a hell of a runner. Unfortunately, he is no longer with us, but he's in the great spirit land. Many of you who've been listening to this show or watching it know that we've talked about Cop City in Georgia. And it's been an attempt to build a whole new police area in a forested area that a number of environmentalists have challenged. They recently, the police did pre-dawn raids on a number of people, a man dragged out by his hair, a woman with no shirt on. The fight against Cop City has attracted national and global headlines, especially after the police shot and killed an environmental protester at the camp in a public park last fall, I believe. The cost of trying to deal with the border on behalf of the conservative Republican governor now has him going to, that's in Texas, and we're talking to a guy named Abbott, now has him going to other states, including Louisiana, where the Louisiana legislature has been asked to spend, I think, $3 million to send some National Guards over there. This is a little bit out of control, and it's becoming a bigger issue than it needs to be, although it is a major challenge. One note you might want to pay attention to is that more people were let in across the border during the Trump years than during the Biden years. On a good note, I get this from Payday, a labor newsletter that I get. Tennessee is the fastest growing state for unions in the country. The UAW, the United Auto Workers, just announced that a majority of Volkswagen workers in Chattanooga have signed cards to join the United Auto Workers. The UAW lost two bitterly contested battles for a union in 2014 and 2019, but things are looking good with substantial gains in the stand-up strike. The union hopes to have more success this year. Been a lot of attention to Biden's age recently. As an older guy, I'm always sympathetic and know that sometimes momentarily you don't remember something, but it usually comes to you. And I dare say that he's got a lot to pay attention to. And I would like to say that no matter what happens, say something happened to Biden and the Vice President Kamala Harris had to become the president, she would be far better, as would Biden be, over the other guy, the orange-haired guy, and whoever he picks. More on age. It was heartening to find this, that an Iranian who is 100 years old will perform in the diving competition at the 2024 World Championships. The Iranian will be among the competitors at the World Aquatics Master Championships, the competition held shortly after the Elite Championships open to all participants. Over 100 years old, still competing. And I'd like to give a shout out to my youngest son, Katie and Lake Jack Henry James. He came out of retirement, so to speak, and performed with his new band called Lake J this past Valentine's Day over at the Empty Bottle. It was a wonderful show. He released the first single from the new album that's coming out. The single is called My Own Mess. And he is heading to Bali along with members of Whitney. He's replacing a friend who can't go, and he's going to do a show with Whitney, and then they're going to Hanoi, and Katie is doing a record release event there. I think that's enough of the opening banner. We've got a number of guests. We've got Jack Bloom talking about conservatism and its interrelationship with race and class. And then we have Adam James will come up and talk a little bit about sports following the Super Bowl. And Victoria Cervantes will tell us a little bit about what's going on with Honduras. There's a trial going on. A former president who's been implicated in a lot of drug trafficking is on trial, I think, in New York. Okay. Stay tuned, little musical break. We'll be right back with the first guest. Welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of the 17th of February in the year 2024. I'm Michael James. I am up here in Chicago's blue 49th Ward. I'm bringing on our first guest, who's someone I've known since 1964, and that would be in the fall of 64. We were both incoming graduate students on Woodrow Wilson fellowships to the University of California at Berkeley. I think Jack came out of University of Chicago. I came out of Lake Forest College. One of the first things to greet us when we arrived on campus was the free speech movement, which was during the time of the civil rights movement and was very much influenced by the civil rights movement. And as usual, I asked Jack, what are you working on? What do you got going on? And he has another book he's working on. And this one is about conservatism and its interrelationship with race and class. He goes on to talk about 3 periods of conservative rule, so to speak, in this country: slavery, post-Reconstruction until the New Deal, and then Reagan's presidency on up to the present. So how are you today?
I'm fine, thanks, Mike. Thanks for that introduction. One of the things that we notice, it's unavoidable at the present time, is the fact that the Republican Party and the conservatives generally seem to be heading us towards trying to reconstruct what the situation was like in the South after Reconstruction. They're trying to create that for the whole country. One-party rule, hard for people to be able to vote, and so on. As I started digging into that, I asked myself the question, what was conservatism like in the period before this? We are now in the 6th decade of reaction to the civil rights movement. And it is one where we've moved from a period of defensive reaction to a period of offensive reaction. And they are now attempting to impose their society, what the society that they want to have, on the rest of us. They're trying to recreate the society that existed in the South after the period of Reconstruction. Reconstruction was the time when the United States attempted to make the South an equal society where blacks and whites could live together equally. And whites simply would have none of that. They fought it. Instead, what they did was they created essentially a one-party dictatorship that made it impossible to challenge the existing power relations. As I looked at this and started to dig into it, I asked myself the question, what was the period of conservatism that took place before this period like? And this was the period that lasted from Reconstruction to the New Deal, and actually a good bit beyond the New Deal to the civil rights movement itself. And even some lasted beyond that. So what was that period like, I asked myself. The white South fought to end Reconstruction. They fought to get rid of the federal troops that were in the South and to construct the kind of society that they wanted to have. And what they constructed was, as I said, a one-party dictatorship where blacks simply were kept on the bottom and had no opportunities. And where white people, white workers, were kept in poverty also themselves. So, for example, some whites worked in the textile mills, and the pay was so low that literally every member of the family, including toddlers, had to work in order to be able to survive. So how did they do this? What did they do? First, as I said, they fought to get rid of the federal troops, and they succeeded in that. And then they imposed this dictatorship. They did away essentially with the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, which was set up to create equal conditions for blacks and whites. That was done away with. They did away with the 15th Amendment to the Constitution, which guaranteed blacks the right to vote. That was done away with. So essentially, they had the kind of society that they wanted to have, where blacks were considered to be inferior to whites. And once they had reconquered power, and had set themselves up essentially as a ruling class. It was the old plantation ruling class, which had been pushed out of power as a result of the Civil War and which fought for the rest of the 19th century to get back into power, and they succeeded in doing so. So then the question was, what were things going to be like after that? And what they did was essentially they fought, having one power once again. They now fought in order to get the whole country to accept their point of view that blacks were inferior and whites should be and were supreme. And they did that. They succeeded in that, in that the whole country accepted that point of view. So then the question became, what else was to happen? And to that, we have to go back once again to the end of Reconstruction. Reconstruction ended in 1877. 1876 was Custer's last stand. And that brought about a whole series of Indian wars where the Native Americans were slaughtered, murdered, and repressed. Then, within 5 years after the end of Reconstruction, they passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, which was just what it sounded like. It was a law that prohibited Chinese from moving to the United States. Then, shortly after they did that, masses of people from Europe started coming to the United States. Eastern Europeans and Southern Europeans. These were different people than the people who had originally settled the country, who were from Northern and Western Europe. And very quickly, as people started noticing the differences, they saw Italians, they saw Bulgarians, they saw Russians, they saw Jews, they saw Poles, they saw all the people from Eastern Europe, the millions of people from Eastern Europe who came flocking to the country in order to carry out the growing industry's need for labor. But the people from Northern and Western Europe didn't like these newcomers. And it turned out, from their point of view, that there wasn't one white race, there were three white races. The superior white race was the Nordics from Northern and Western Europe, and the inferior white races were people from Eastern Europe, they were called Alpines, and people from Southern Europe who were called Mediterraneans. These people were far inferior from their point of view to the people who had originally settled the country. And there was a real danger that those people, as they saw it, that those people who came from these areas, Eastern and Southern Europe, would essentially destroy what had been built by the superior Nordics from Northern and Western Europe. So they gave them what they called intelligence tests. And they found that many of them were, in their words, feeble-minded. They were given categories that at that time were considered to be legitimate scientific perspectives. That is, people were morons, they were idiots, they were imbeciles. These were supposedly scientific terms, rather than being the epithets that we see them as now. And so, as they worked on this, they came up with the idea that they should stop this immigration. So 100 years ago, we had millions and millions of people coming in from Southern and Eastern Europe, like we have people coming in from the rest of the world now. And just like now, we see the hostility to those people coming in. That was the attitude people had towards the people from Southern and Eastern Europe. So that in 1924, they passed a law that prohibited, that essentially cut back on immigration and stipulated that whatever number they set of immigrants who could come, and it was a very low number, the proportion would have to be the same proportion as those people were in the country not in 2020 or 1920, not in 1910, not in 1900, not in 1890, but in 1880, before large numbers of people started coming from Europe. So, in other words, for example, it became possible for as many as 100 Greeks to be allowed into the country per year. And that essentially stopped immigration. And that stop of immigration remained until 1965. What changed it in 1965? Well, in 1964 was the Goldwater-Johnson election. This was the election that took place during the midst of the Civil Rights Movement. And Goldwater was against the Civil Rights Act that had, at that time was a Civil Rights Bill. And he was one of the very few senators from outside the Confederacy who wanted to do this, who was against the Civil Rights Act. It transformed the Republican Party. For the first time, the Republicans won the Deep South states, and those were practically the only states they won, except for Arizona, which is where Goldwater himself had come from. So the Democrats won a huge victory in 1964. Not only did Johnson have a landslide election over Barry Goldwater, but the Democrats took over 2/3 of both houses. That's when the civil rights laws were passed. It's when the Great Society laws were passed. And it was when a new Immigration Act was passed, which ended all the quotas, made it possible for people to come to the country from wherever they wanted to. And they did. And so now we have a country that has been transformed by the huge number of people who have come in and are still coming in. And it's interesting. Mostly people aren't coming in from Europe. Europeans are often better off than Americans are. But people are coming in from Africa, from Asia, and from Latin America. And they're coming in because material conditions here are better than they are in those countries. So that was sort of the next thing. As part of, it's important to understand that the United States, as the major, most important slave society in the world at the time, became one of the leaders of racism in the world as well. So those ideas about racism that I've already spoken about, they were developed in that context. And similarly, this idea of the inferiority of all kinds of peoples who were not Northern and Western Europeans became widely adopted here in this country. And then came the movement of, it was called eugenics. The eugenics movement's idea was that all these inferior people were endangering the whole country. The country was, going to become much more inferior as a result of this. And this was really important because as these people were flocking in, it turns out accordion have sexual relations with a Pole, a Russian, a Jew, an Italian, or a Black person, or a Latin American. They would adopt the inferior characteristics of those peoples, so that the superior peoples would essentially be done away with. So they decided that they should be kept from breeding and thereby kept from adding their inferior genes to the gene pool. The problem they had, however, was if you're going to keep people from breeding, how do you do that? You have to lock them up, essentially. And essentially they hit on the idea of doing this to women. So because it would be the women, for the most part, who would, if you stop a man from being able to breed, another man can take his place. But if you stop a woman from being able to breed, no one can take her place. So but to lock people up from about age 15 to about age 45, which is their period of fertility, would be extremely expensive. It would mean having to lock up millions of people for this lengthy period of time. So instead, they came up with the idea of forcibly sterilizing these people, sterilizing them regardless of what their own desires were. And so they set about to do this. And they did it, by the way, oftentimes without even informing them that they were being sterilized. Right. They just had to undergo some kind of a medical procedure. So this began, the first of these laws that was passed allowing this was passed in 1907 in the state of Indiana. Indiana became the first state. Some 30 plus states eventually adopted these laws. And from 1907 until the 1980s, that is beyond the civil rights movement, we didn't know about it at the time that it was happening. They were forcibly sterilizing people. They've sterilized somewhere between 60 and 70,000 people without them having any say in what happened to them. So eugenics, sort of became the next way of doing this. It's important.
Let me jump in here. You did talk about how these conservative ideas prevail for a long period of time and long after some of the practitioners have gone. We had a situation today where we have a divided Congress. We have people from all over the world coming to the United States. And unlike Goldwater, who lost by a big margin, it doesn't look like the Republican nominee will lose by the same giant margin. I'm assuming he will lose, and I'm hoping so. What do you have to say about the current state of affairs? Because we can certainly have you back to talk more about this really interesting history about the United States that many of us don't know.
Well, as I said, as I see it, the Republican Party has been for a long time making itself into a party where white supremacists could feel comfortable. And, that's the direction it's been going in, at least since Goldwater. The people who followed Goldwater, including Nixon, including Reagan, including Bush, all of them added to this. And then Trump came along, and Trump was different from the ones who had preceded him because these people had always maintained that they weren't racists, that they, in fact, that they were ordinary Americans, and they were just trying to make America better. Trump came along and was an overt racist. And the people who had been brought into the Republican Party by its previous approaches now grabbed onto that. And they said, let's get rid of these people who try to maintain a facade that they're not racist and have a racist come in his stead. So that's what we have now. And we have someone who is threatening now to overthrow our people who are American allies, people who, countries where there is democracy. He's saying that he'll say to Russia, go do whatever you want to these people. And we know the dangers that would produce. He's talking about driving millions of people out of the country, including the dreamers, people who had been brought here as children and have grown up as Americans. He's talking about throwing all of them out of the country. So we're facing a danger that, however bad the United States has been at times in the past, we will be joining the world's dictators. We will be joining Putin and Xi and making this into what I could consider to be a country that will be very difficult for many people to live in, including myself.
Well, you're a fortunate or unfortunate guy to live in Indiana. You teach at Indiana University at Gary. And I was just down in Bloomington and I had a great time and met some great people, but I don't know about Indiana. What's going to happen?
Well, the Indiana legislature has just introduced a new law that threatens tenure and that, attacks people who have points of view with which they disagree. So how that is going to be working out, it's really hard to say. Indiana University is a pretty impressive university. It has done a fine job of research and of education. What's going to happen at this time, it's very difficult to say. Trump has said that he wants to certify, people, teachers. Does that also mean teachers in higher education? And what will be the method of certification if he were to become president? We're on the brink of something that has never existed before in the United States, as far as I can tell.
Well, you got a lot of information. I think the kids who take your classes are real fortunate because every time I talk to you, I learn a lot and am reminded about other things. And you and I are longtime comrades out of the free speech movement, both at UCal Berkeley. And we live close to each other, and we'll be talking soon because you're a good guest and I'd love to have you back on.
Okay, good to talk to you, Mike.
Welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of the 17th of February, the year 2024. And once again, I'm Michael James here in Chicago. And it's always a pleasure to bring on our next guest. She's used to come on the show quite frequently when we were at the Heartland Cafe in the early days. The one and only Victoria Cervantes, who for a long time has been working to improve conditions and relationship between the United States and the people of Honduras. And she's involved in some pretty serious stuff with a former Honduran president, now indicted on drug charges, etc. Fill us in, Vicky. Tell us what's going on with Honduras.
Yeah, well, I'm going to start with the present and go back a little bit. But right now, the former president of Honduras, Juan Orlando Hernández, not affectionately known as Ho, all over Honduras, is going on trial in New York City in the Southern District Court of the federal system for having his own cartel and being a narcotics trafficker. And he was in office in Honduras from 2013 until 2021, illegally most of that time, and really was part of the post-coup. There was a coup in 2009 that the U.S. supported, and he was part of the subsequent governments that really destroyed Honduras and led to things like the thousands of migrants fleeing the country. So he's going on trial. And one thing that's missing in this trial and been missing from the U.S. government and prosecutors is the role of the United States, and also Canada is an important player, but the role of the United States, not only in supporting the coup, but in supporting the subsequent building of a narcotics dictatorship. Talking about Juan Orlando Hernández as their friend, is their partner in the war on drugs, et cetera, really supporting and propping him up when in fact he was building a cartel, and people knew that, and the government was informed about that many times by many of us and by some members of Congress like Jan Schakowsky, Chuy Garcia are two examples who brought up the human rights violations, the links with organized crime, etc. So that's why we've launched a campaign, put the U.S. and Canada on trial. U.S. and Canada are guilty too.
So you're saying that our two of our favorite Congresspeople, Jan and Chuy, they did good on this?
They did good on this.
Yes.
Yes. From the beginning, from the very beginning, after the coup.
So what's what's really interesting to me is kind of the relationship between U.S. policy and our current migrant situation. Mm-hmm. And, as I recall that Hillary Clinton was supportive of the coup.
Yes, she was.
Way back,
yes, she was. And in fact, it's sad to say that it's been a bipartisan policy. The coup occurred when Obama was president and Clinton was Secretary of State. And after Obama made a few brief statements against it and took a few measures, but then the State Department moved on it and Clinton supported the coup and the subsequent governments. Trump, the same policy basically, and Biden, the same policy. So just to make clear, this has not been a policy that belongs to just one party. It's been a bipartisan policy of empire.
So tell us a little bit about the campaign to put both the U.S. and Canada on trial, along with the dictator.
Yeah. So what we want to do is really bring out the history and what sort of the "we told you so," and the U.S. and Canada cannot now pretend that oh yeah, he's a terrible cartel. That's just, we didn't know about it, but now we do, because in fact they did know about it. So our campaign, we're doing a bunch of education and informative articles that you can find on the HSN Facebook or on Honduras Now. .org, which is a podcast and media outlet that we work with.
HSN is Honduran Solidarity
Network. Yeah. So we're bringing out all the information, and we have Karen Spring, the co-coordinator, along with myself of HSN, is in New York and is following the trial and publishing not just what's going on in the trial, but always linking it to what's not being said in the courtroom, which is what the U.S. knew, what they were doing, and also what Canada was involved in. So we're trying to expose that the U.S. and Canada gained from this relationship with Juan Orlando Hernández, and that's why they didn't care that he was building a cartel and increasing the power of organized crime in Honduras. So we have some demands, and we're talking to Congress and trying to get folks like Representative Chakowski and Garcia, Ramirez, Delia Ramirez, and others to support our demands to investigate, declassify, investigate, pay reparations for victims of the DEA actions, end their interference in the new government's progressive reforms, and stop supporting punitive measures in the trade agreements that are hurting Honduras' recovery from the narco dictatorship.
Vicky Cervantes, let me ask you, do you think there are other people in Congress or other people besides Chuy and Jan who you've mentioned? I bring that up because when Chuy was, Representative Garcia was on a show recently, he was pretty critical of the border negotiations, which didn't include any Latino congressional people involved with it. And I'm just wondering, do we have any more support than just our a few great Chicago congressional folks, or is there a tidal wave coming on this?
Yeah. There are a number of congressmen who have spoken out in the past. We have Hank Johnson, Ilhan Omar, a number of the squad, Tlalib, and others who have spoken out on Honduras. And our hope is, as we're launching this campaign, we launched it in January. The trial was supposed to start today, but we just found out it looks like it's going to be next week, because there's, the lawyers are all doing their maneuvers. Yeah. So we have an action that you can access on our Facebook page to let the Congress people know that you want them to meet these demands, to declassify and to investigate, have hearings into what was going on, so that we can take measures that we don't keep doing this over and over again in our policy. So we're hopeful that we can at least get more information out there and get a number of the Congress folks to sign on to this campaign.
What is the current situation in Honduras? I know that there was an election for someone more progressive. Mm-hmm. I think that didn't work out. Fill us in on where Honduras is at. And I go way back to remembering when the U.S. built a big airstrip, and that was probably during the time of the Contra War in Nicaragua. But, some of the U.S. policies in both places was horrendous. Tell us a little bit, Vicky, how Honduras is today. Who's in power? What's our relationship to them? Are there any signs of
today today the government led by Xiomara Castro who's the wife of the president who was overthrown in the coup, but an active person, an activist, and a person in her own right, not just a shadow. Her party, Libre, was formed out of the resistance to the coup, and they have a reform program. They've done some very important things in the labor law, minimum wage, amnesty for victims of the prosecution and persecution during the coup years. So they have their reform. It's not like they're able to just sweep everything away. And one of the tasks that they're struggling the most with is, of course, dismantling all of the structures, political, economic, and governmental, that were part of the narco dictatorship. Because the fact that Juan Orlando Hernández is sitting in jail in New York has not meant that the whole narco criminal structure is gone. There's lots of people. So that's been the big struggle. Unfortunately, a lot of the work they've been doing on that has been opposed by the State Department. The State Department, the ambassador in Tegucigalpa, Laura Dogu, are like incredibly active on Twitter, criticizing and calling into question the sovereignty of the Honduran government to make deep changes. So that's what's going on. There of course are weaknesses and problems, and there's this external pressure, which we also really want to take the moment to denounce, because it's hardly fair to critique a government for all sorts of small things when you're the one that helped build up the situation that they're confronting. And so that's how it also fits with this campaign, is we want the U.S. to stop interfering with the reforms and to accept accountability and take action to correct the path of the U.S. and Canada in Honduras.
Well, it doesn't sound like the U.S. is doing a very good job. Our State Department seems to be missing on a lot of, things going on in a lot of places. It's really too bad.
Right.
And I'm glad that we do have some allies that we both know. We can encourage them to make some pushes. Tell us a little bit, sum up the campaign and how people make contact and what you would like them to do.
Right. So our campaign we're calling it Put the U.S. and Canada on Trial. And what we mean by that is hold them accountable for their role in destroying democracy and establishing the narco dictatorship in Honduras, which destroyed the economy and the social fabric, and the Hondurans are struggling to overcome it. What we want people to do is we have a list of demands. You can see them all on hondurasnow.org, also on the Honduras Solidarity Network Twitter feed and Facebook. And we have petitions to Congress. We have language for letters to the editor, so we can get more of this information out. And today at 11:30 Chicago time, Karen Spring will be going live on our Facebook page just to give an update about the campaign and what's happening in New York City. Karen lives in Honduras. She's married to a former political prisoner in Honduras, and she's co-coordinator with me of the HSN. So she's going to be there, and that will be at around 11:30 Chicago time today.
And that's today. Well, that's long after this show is. But give us one more time the Facebook site and the email site.
So Facebook is, you just look up Honduras Solidarity Network, and you get right there. We also have Twitter. You look up again Honduras Solidarity Network, and the other site where we have all of our documents and campaign is hondurasnow.org, and that's a podcast and media site.
Vicky Cervantes, you always enhance my knowledge, and I'm greatly appreciative. And, if you will, I'm going to try to get a promise out of you, not only to come back on the show, but if you ever have little announcements or little news items, I'm always looking for material for the opening remarks of the show. So keep it coming, just like you did today. Today, I woke up and there you were on my phone, and I said, oh, great. And I was in need of another guest. And, you're always one of the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I hope to come back in a few weeks, maybe, when we see what's
Where are you
happening in
now?
New York. I'm in Chicago. I am.
Uh-huh.
My internet feels like I'm in Honduras, but I am actually in Chicago. But I would hope to be able to update you in a few weeks when the trial is in full swing and our campaign is going.
Right on,
Thank you
sister.
so much. I appreciate
Thanks a
your work
lot.
so much, all of you.
Right on. And everyone else, stay tuned here on the left end of your dial or however you're getting the show. We will be back shortly with another guest. We're going to do our little sports finale at the end of the show that will probably address this recent Super Bowl. Be right back. All you listeners, all you viewers, welcome back to Live from the Heartland for our finale. We saved some of the best for last. And it's our trusty sports reporter, sometimes political commentator, longtime cousin of me, Adam James, out there in California. Hello to you, Adam.
Hello, Michael. Great to be on the Live from the Heartland show again. Thank you so much for having me.
You're always good. Tell us a little bit about the Super Bowl. Give me a wrap up on that. We'll do a little football and then we'll go on.
Well, it was a great game. I mean, that's the one thing that we always ask for when it comes to this big build up and this eventful, game. It's more than just a regular game, and it paid off. It was a really terrific matchup. 49ers played great. Unfortunately, they came up short. Those who root for that Chiefs team and their fan, they certainly had a good time, and it was a lot of fun. One thing I will point out that last week when we were doing our pre-show, and I mentioned this guy number 95 who plays for the Kansas City Chiefs, the defensive lineman. For those of you who are out there who are former linemen who love to watch the trenches, that 95 had an amazing play right at the end. Kind of reminded me of Aaron Donald when he made his dynamic final play ending the Cincinnati Bengals Super Bowl run. Chris Jones pulled it off, made a fantastic play that affected the outcome. Great job.
Love watching the linemen. What about the Bears? The Bears got a couple of people went to the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, so it was a big win for the Bears. Yes, sir. It was a big win for the Bears over this last week as well, because there were a number of players who have been Bears in the past who got in, including Dwight Freeney and Julius Peppers, who both had played for the Bears. But the two guys, Devin Hester, who is probably the greatest return player, punt returns and kick returns. Now, of course, he reminds a lot of us Bear fans of the great Gale Sayers. So Gale Sayers had a big impact on my life and my heart. Although I was too young to have watched him growing up, I read his book, I Am Third. And that's the book that actually was the inspiration for, television movie with Billy D. Williams and James Caan. And it was a terrific movie. And that was based on the book, I Am Third, which was Gale Sayers' life story, his autobiography. And in it, his message is, in his life, third, he dedicates himself to doing those good deeds in life.
Adam, let me ask you about the potential first round pick of the Bears.
Yes, but wait, one last guy I got to mention, and that's Mongo. That's the great defensive lineman. That's the lineman theme today. Right. Steve McMichael, who got into the Hall of Fame. And of course, there's a funny story about when he first came to the Bears, and the defensive coordinator coach, Buddy Ryan, who was a real tough guy, he came over and he said, "You've been working out? You in shape?" And he said, "Yeah, I got a dog, and I've been running every day with this dog. And that dog's got me in really great shape." And then that first day of practice, Steve McMichael had a hard time with those wind sprints. At the end of practice, Steve McMichael was having a hard time with the wind sprints. And Buddy Ryan came over and leaned into him and said, "We should have signed the dog." But it turns out Steve McMichael was a dog. He was a tough SOB. He went on to be a part of that 85 Bears team that was probably the greatest defense to ever play football. And, the Baltimore Ravens will argue that one. But definitely up there.
No, I was there. I saw that Super Bowl in New Orleans.
That's right. You were actually there. So you're one of the few Jameses who's been to Super Bowl. My father, David James, went to Super Bowl number 7 when the Miami Dolphins beat the Vikings. And then you got to see the Bears. I went to
2. I was at the Steelers and Seattle, Detroit also.
That was a great game. That was.
So what about the Bears' big draft pick and all that? Who's going to be our quarterback? Do you know yet?
So that's the big controversy in regards to should they keep Justin Fields, who's been a fantastic player. He's really a good citizen, good teammate, good part of the community. But it has to do with the fiscal components of football. He's going to be getting a new contract soon. His amount that he's going to count for on that salary cap is going to be higher. It makes a lot of sense for the Bears to trade Justin Ken for him. Wish him well, put him in a good spot because he's earned it. and then take that quarterback out of USC, Caleb Williams, who I've had the fortune of watching out here in Southern California. He's a heck of a quarterback. He has a great arm. He's a little bit like Mahomes in that he's got a lot of creativity, really sharp guy. I think the Bears are going to do great with him or whoever they take. Wishing them the best. One thing's for sure, that coach of the Bears has got to perform these next 2 years because they're going to give him a chance to work with this young quarterback, and they better show some results or they're going to move on, and that's going to be tough on the young quarterback to change coaches after only a year or two.
Well, we'll see what happens. I kind of like Justin Fields. I don't mind if he sticks around. Let's go to a little women's sports. What do you got? Because we don't have too much time today.
Well, I watched this amazing game over the weekend. I don't know if anybody else got to see it. It was the Iowa Hawkeyes playing at Nebraska. The Nebraska women's team sold it out. Amazing crowd. They won in the last second in a really close, exciting game. What I thought was really interesting, at the end of the game, they interviewed the head coach who'd played basketball at Nebraska, and they'd never sold out the stadium like that. And for her to look around that stadium and to see that crowd and to feel that energy, how much that meant for that program, for those women that are playing there, but also for the sport of women's basketball, the sport of women's sports, period. Whether it's softball, soccer, basketball, it's doing really well right now. Another area of women's sports that's somewhat controversial are combat sports, boxing and MMA. There was a time that women weren't allowed to do those sports. Well, not only are they allowed to do it now, they're thriving. There's an amazing women's sports athletes who are doing extremely well. Big crowds, lots of fans, and great performances, terrific athletic, going out there and getting it done and doing really well, looking sharp doing it. So.
Well, Adam, one of the things I know you're into is the mental training for sports. And
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that. Give us some inspiration as we go out today.
Absolutely. Well, I regularly teach seminars on mindset or getting into the Zen zone, the mental conditioning, mind training. It comes from my martial arts background. In the martial arts, this is very common. It's increasingly being done on a very scientific approach, psychologists. And essentially, there's some really powerful techniques that we can all incorporate prior to performing in our sports. But every day, if we can take a moment, we can actually develop this skill set. It's kind of like, conditioning your body, going out and going for a walk, lifting some weights, going for a swim in the pool. That's going to condition you, make you fitter. The same thing is true for these mind training techniques. First of all, I highly recommend everybody is mentally active. You read, you interact with others, you have intelligent conversations. That keeps you mentally sharp. But these techniques are also proven to be very effective. The first is meditation, or just clearing your mind, settling yourself, getting into that clear thinking state. The next is to use affirmations, which are short, powerful statements that affirm or put solidly into your thinking these beliefs, these attitudes. It's kind of like throwing a stone into the water. If the water's choppy, that stone will have no effect other than plopping in the water. You want to see that ripple effect come out. So it starts with meditation. It starts with calming your mind, using deep breathing. The rhythm of breathing, you practice that to clear your mind and bring yourself into the now, to the present moment. And in that moment, when you use those affirmations, they'll have more effect. The next technique is visualization, where you use essentially your power of your imagination to see yourself achieving these great feats that you're for. Now, this is obviously great for sports. If you're a tennis player, you imagine yourself hitting that winning shot. But it's also effective for a dancer as you think about having that perfect spin, that landing just in the right spot, or a singer, or a business person in the office saying just the right thing at that moment that creates the business deal that brings about the success for the company. As you visualize yourself having that successful moment, you then anchor that emotional state, that mindset, by using a physical a power word, another little affirmation, to connect yourself to that emotional state. Because then what you can do is you can trigger it at any time with a snap of your fingers, whether it's a clapping of the hands, whether it's a fist bump, and you say your powerful word, I can do it. Whatever that may be, the more you do that, the more you develop that mental connection to that statement, and you can bring it forth in a moment. You're up there at the free throw line getting ready to shoot the winning shot. You do your affirmation, you do your anchoring technique, and then you put yourself in that Zen zone, that mental state where you're connected to the best of yourself.
Well, Adam James, you always seem to be in the zone. And I appreciate you coming on the show. And there's a lot more on this long list you gave me, but we're going to have you back on, if not next week, soon thereafter.
Well, I look forward to it. It's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Wishing everybody out there a very happy New Year and all the best.
Right, Happy New Year. Yeah, well, it's February. Happy
Happy Lunar New Year. May the year of the dragon bring you success and prosperity.
Okay, everybody, it's time we wrap it up. And we want to thank all of our guests. We want to thank Jack Bloom, who came on. We want to thank Victoria Cervantes and Adam James. I want to remind everybody we have an election here in Chicago on March 19th. It's not real exciting, but one thing that is real important, there are a few, we'll get to those, but one is real important, is bring Chicago home. Tax one-time, big-time sales, help the homeless, get rid of people living in the streets. Coming up next week, we got a Workers' Right Film Festival going on. Someone from the United Auto Workers is going to come and talk about the film Finally Got the News. And I want to thank the people who make the show possible, including the engineer Hal James, producers Katie Hogan, Tom Clark, and Lynn Orman. We'll be back next week to do good in the world, because the world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that Adam does, that Jack does, that Hal does, et cetera, et cetera. All power to the people.